business is taken up. We're expecting first votes around the 4:30 time frame this afternoon. Have a good day.
The House will be in order. The Chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., July 31st, 2013. I hereby appoint the Honorable Joseph Heck to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 3, 2013, the Chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour, and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes each, but in no event shall debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. ROS-LEHTINEN, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support cancer victims and also to honor a valiant leader in our community who turns 86 on August 12th, Betsy Kaplan. I'll start by asking all of us to support the patients, the families, and victims of a special type of cancer, pancreatic cancer. Pancreatic cancer is the deadliest of all forms of cancer, with a 5-year survival rate of just 6%. In 2013 alone, pancreatic cancer will affect 45,000 patients, 73% of whom will die within 1 year of diagnosis. In my home state of Florida, it is estimated that out of the 3,380 new cases, 2,770 people will die from this terrible disease. Last year, I was proud to help pass the Recalcitrant Cancer Research Act, a bill designed to turn around these horrible statistics. Mr. Speaker, we must continue to make survival from pancreatic cancer a priority, and I urge my colleagues to stand with us in this fight. And a South Floridian who is involved in many worthwhile causes, whether they are related to improving the lives of others or fighting for better treatment for the disabled, is Betsy Kaplan. Betsy is a retired school board member from Miami-Dade County Public Schools. She served there for 16 years and has been recognized in our community for her notable achievements and contributions fostering arts education and student guidance in our public schools. With an unprecedented 47 years of professional experience in the education field, Betsy retired with many honors, from her teaching career to spearheading the adoption of the tobacco-free school policy and advocating for educational programs that cater to special needs students. A decorated award winner, Betsy has received numerous honors, ranging from the Florida School Board's President's Award to being recognized as a woman of impact by the Community Coalition for Women's History. Most recently, Betsy received the Breaking the Glass Ceiling Award from the Jewish Museum of Florida at Florida International University. It is thanks to Betsy that the Miami-Dade County School District is known as an outstanding model of public arts education in the nation. As a former Florida certified teacher, I recognize Betsy's commitment to ensuring that our students get the quality education they deserve, and I thank Betsy for her exceptional efforts in creating opportunities for students to learn, to grow, and to succeed in their educational, social, and professional lives. So congratulations to Betsy Kaplan, and let us all keep up the fight to beat all types of cancer, especially pancreatic cancer. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman yields back.
First, okay.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a few minutes, we'll be meeting with President Obama here in the Capitol. While I appreciate the President's commitment to the economy, and I do believe he's passionate about renewing and rebuilding America, there's a certain irony to having the conversation today. Because this is the very same day the House is completing its work on a woefully inadequate budget bill to fund transportation, housing, and urban development. By insisting on an increase in defense spending and approving a budget target that is unrealistically low and freezing in the sequestration, we're seeing budgets that bear no relationship to reality. $44 billion in transportation discretionary appropriations, down 15% from the authorized level. It makes no attempt to deal with the looming collapse of the Highway Trust Fund. It slashes Amtrak a third below the current level. Hardly responsible. Many of the budget reductions in the housing programs and the community development block grant are even worse. And we began those deliberations on the same day the American Society for Civil Engineers released their report card on the state of American infrastructure. The grade was D+. And it was only that high because we have increased some private investment, some local government funding, and, of course, the reviled stimulus funding that helped reduce some of the more egregious shortfalls while putting people to work. It's ironic that some of the rationale for this bizarre budget behavior, which thankfully will never be enacted into law, is the need to save taxpayer money and reduce deficits. In reality, if this budget were approved, it would actually end up costing American taxpayers more. Families will earn even less if we continue this funding level for infrastructure that is inadequate. There will be hundreds of millions of hours of time lost as people are stuck in traffic, and the number of miles of congestion increased over 30%. And of course, our businesses will pay almost $500 billion more in transportation costs and repair, while business will be underperforming, and that will cost money too. The path forward is clear. We should provide increased funding for transportation and infrastructure. The gas tax has not been increased in 20 years, which, incidentally, was the last time we had balanced budgets. This is the quickest way to get the new revenues that many feel are necessary to be part of any rational, long-term, grand budget agreement and tax reform. It would be supported by a wide array of business, labor, environmental groups, local government. Indeed, there is a vast coalition that is saying, tax me so I can do my job better, and we can revitalize America's communities and our sagging economy. It's no longer acceptable for us to talk past one another. By dealing boldly with the infrastructure crisis in the context of realistic budgets and meaningful tax reform, we can put Americans back to work. We can break the logjam here on Capitol Hill. We can strengthen the economy while we make our communities more livable and our families safer, healthier, and more economically secure.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Wolf, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, over the last 2 weeks, I raised a series of questions focusing on the attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi, as well as Washington's response or lack thereof. To date, little is known why Ambassador Stevens was at the U.S. consulate in the days leading up to the anniversary of 9/11. Even less known is about where the other American facility in Benghazi, the CIA annex. What was the annex? When was it established? How many people worked at the annex? Of these, how many were direct agency employees and how many were contractors? What was the ratio of CIA staff to security contractors? why was there a facility operated by the CIA in Benghazi? Perhaps it was established to assist in U.S. efforts to secure weapons in the wake of the Libyan revolution. As early as 2011, National Journal reported that, quote, the U.S. is also planning to ramp up spending to help Libya's interim government secure and destroy the shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles and weapons looted from Gaddafi stockpiles. A senior State Department official said Clinton will tell Libyan leaders that the U.S. contribution to these efforts will go up to $40 million, end of quote. The same article noted that, quote, the U.S. has already spent nearly $6 million on its conventional weapons disposal efforts, sending a quick reaction force of weapons experts to Libya by October of 2011, end of quote. If indeed the facility in Benghazi was involved in the collection of these weapons, where are they? The $40 million promised by Secretary Clinton would buy a very large quantity of weapons. Were they shipped out of Benghazi? Are they in warehouses on U.S. soil? Are they in other allied countries, or did they end up elsewhere? There has been speculation that some of these weapons may have ended up in Syria. It's particularly noteworthy that during the same time period that the U.S. engaged in collecting weapons in Libya, respected national security reporter Mark Rosenbaum wrote on August 1, 2012, quote, that President Barack Obama has signed a secret order authorizing U.S. support for rebels seeking to depose Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and his government. U.S. sources familiar with the matter said Obama's order, approved earlier this year and known as an intelligence finding, broadly permits the CIA and other U.S. agencies to provide support that could help the rebels oust Assad, end of quote. The article continues. The White House is now apparently stopping short of giving the rebels lethal weapons, even as some U.S. allies do just that. And precisely when Obama signed the secret intelligence authorization, an action not previously reported could not be determined, end of quote. However, Rosenbaum also reported this important information. He said a U.S. government source acknowledged that under provision of the presidential finding, the United States was collaborating with a secret command center operated by Turkey and its allies, and NBC said the shoulder-file missiles, also known as man-pads, have been delivered to the rebels via Turkey. Is it possible that the President's intelligence finding included an authorization for the weapons collected in Libya to be transferred to Syrian rebels? Was the CIA annex being used to facilitate these transfers? If so, how did the weapons physically move from Libya to Syria? By plane, by ship? And again, I asked if these weapons were not being transferred to other countries like Syria, where exactly did they end up? Was the CIA annex being used as a logistics center to track and transfer these weapons? Was Ambassador Stevens' visit to the CIA annex on September 10 associated with these operations? And if these activities were taking place, was this consistent with the President's intelligence finding? Was the Congress notified? Mr. Speaker, I raise these questions knowing that CIA operations anywhere are sensitive and there is an appropriate time and place for the discussions. However, I don't think the American people will ever learn the truth about what happened that night and why, including the questionable U.S. response, unless they understand what exactly was taking place at the annex. That is why I continue to believe that a House Select Committee is the most appropriate path forward to investigate this and many other unanswered questions about Benghazi. And yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise along with my colleague, Representative Stephen Palazzo, to honor James Watts for his many years of service to the community and country. Born in 1919 in Macomb, Mississippi, Mr. Watts has dedicated his career to public service. His children and stepchildren have followed in their parents' footsteps and have been leaders in their own right throughout the United States. During World War II, Mr. Watts defended his country by tracking German submarines as a member of the United States Coast Guard. Later, in civilian life, he would go on to hold executive board positions in both the Boy Scouts of America and the Girl Scouts of America organizations. Mr. Watts' passion for volunteerism speaks volumes about his character. While he lived in Grand Junction, Colorado, he volunteered as an EMT and then a paramedic for what is now St. Mary's Hospital and Regional Medical Center in Grand Junction, Colorado. Upon relocation to Gulfport, Mississippi, Mr. Watts taught CPR and first aid for the American Red Cross and various organizations around the country, a testament to his devotion to the well-being of the communities he has lived in and visited. Perhaps one of the biggest accomplishments was in 1956 while he worked for the Atomic Energy Commission. As a mine safety engineer in New Mexico, Mr. Watts noticed a uranium boom town of more than 10,000 residents who were living without access to a local hospital for emergency services. With ambition and selflessness, he took it upon himself to spearhead organizational efforts for the creation of the Cibola General Hospital, which has been committed to serving the medical needs of the community since 1959. Ever since, patients continued to be saved, the critically ill continue to be treated, and the 24-hour emergency care is still available to the community. Now at 94 years old, Mr. Watts resides with his wife, Barbara, in Gulfport, Mississippi. Although he is retired, the organizations and community projects developed under his leadership are still in operation today. I believe Mr. Watts' life is a great example of generosity and devotion to the greater good of society. We can all learn from Mr. Watts' inspiring story of public service, and I join my colleague in recognizing and thanking Mr. Watts for his life of service. We wish him, his wife Barbara, and their children Susan and Rick, who is here with us in the gallery, Jane, Danette, and Paul, all the best in their future endeavors, and thank them for their continuing their father's legacy of noble service to the community. And I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman yields back. Members will be reminded not to acknowledge those or recognize those seated in the gallery. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Fitzpatrick, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise this morning in strong support of the 8 bills before the House today, or more importantly, in support of what they represent, which is common sense government reform. As a representative of the hardworking taxpayers in southeastern Pennsylvania, it is my duty to make sure that they are getting value for every dollar that they send to the nation's capital. Right now, our federal government seems to find better ways to waste money than to save it. The culture of systemic waste, abuse, and lack of accountability needs to end. We have the opportunity this week. We can vote to streamline the federal government to make it work for the American taxpayer. The Stop Government Abuse legislative package being considered today works to rein in widespread waste and inefficiency throughout Washington. These bills represent common sense, bipartisan solutions that actually solve problems. After this week, members will leave for a month to head back to our districts. Many of us are going to be attending events and hosting town halls to facilitate conversations with our constituents. I am eager to report to them that despite our differences, this body was able to come together to support so many common sense reforms. And so I urge my colleagues to support the bills considered here and to vote to begin restoring faith in government. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, for 5 minutes. So, without objection.
Madam Speaker, for the 20th time this Congress, I stand here to talk about how we can end hunger now. Hunger is a political condition. We have the food, we have the means, and we have the systems to end hunger now. We know how to do it. We just don't have the political will to make it happen. But that wasn't always the case. In the late 1960s, America began seriously to confront its poverty problem. President Johnson fought the war on poverty, and his programs, including Medicare, Medicaid, and Title I education programs, just to name a few, started to combat the poverty and inequality that were rampant across many parts of this country. President Nixon followed in his footsteps by hosting the first and only White House Conference on Food, Nutrition, and Health, a conference that focused on hunger in America. The result of that conference was a precipitous drop in the number of hungry people in America. Contrary to Budget Committee Chairman Paul Ryan's belief, the anti-poverty programs from the Johnson administration and the anti-hunger programs created by the Nixon administration worked. In fact, hunger and poverty would be much worse today if it weren't for these programs. The truth is we almost eradicated hunger in America thanks to a strengthened food stamp program and the creation of the WIC program in the 1970s. But those gains were erased and hunger increased because of the policies of Ronald Reagan. Since then, we've seen food stamp usage increase during every single administration, and we can and we must do better. One of the highlights of the effort that nearly ended hunger in America in the 1970s was the WIC program, formerly titled the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children. WIC is an innovative program that provides nutritious food and food counseling for pregnant women, nursing mothers, infants, and children under the age of 5. Why is this program so critical? Well, Madam Speaker, prenatal enrollment in WIC is associated with lower infant mortality, fewer premature births, and a lower likelihood that infants will have very low or low birth weights. And because an infant's medical costs increase tenfold if they are low birth weight, every dollar invested in WIC yields between $1.90 and up to $4.20 in Medicaid savings. This is literally about improving the physical well-being of developing children. This program affects these participants for the entirety of their lives. It's just that important, and it's critical that we get it right. But unlike SNAP, WIC is a discretionary program. This means it is subject to the appropriations process. And in this time of budgetary austerity, WIC was included in the across-the-board cuts to defense and non-discretionary programs under the sequester. SNAP was excluded because it's an entitlement like Social Security and Medicare, but WIC was included in the sequester because it is an entitlement. And as if the cuts in sequester weren't bad enough, the House Agriculture Appropriations Bill now cuts the program even further by more than $500 million. The 7.3% cut to WIC in this bill could result in over 200,000 pregnant mothers and infants losing nutritious food. Even factoring in the reserve fund, 55,000 moms and kids will go without nutrition that they need. It is sad that the Republican-controlled House of Representatives is cutting vital health and development programs for pregnant and nursing mothers and their very young children, while at the same time they found billions of dollars to send overseas in a wasteful war in Afghanistan. Madam Speaker, during my series of End Hunger Now speeches, there's been one unifying theme that I believe puts us on the path to end hunger now. That theme is presidential leadership. We need presidential leadership to end hunger now. The last White House Conference on Food, Nutrition, and Health nearly ended hunger in America. I know that we can do even better if President Obama would convene such a conference. With a White House Conference on Food and Nutrition, we could focus on ways to reduce hunger and obesity in smart, not arbitrary ways. We can figure out how to treat hunger and obesity as health issues while we work on ways to properly attack these scourges. Madam Speaker, we desperately need presidential leadership. We need a comprehensive plan. We need the political will. We need a White House Conference on Food and Nutrition. I urge the President to act now. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Nevada, for Mr. Heck, for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I come to the floor today with a heavy heart to pay my respects and bid a solemn farewell to Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Officer David Van Buskirk. Officer Van Buskirk was killed in the line of duty Tuesday, July 23rd, while participating in a rescue mission outside of Las Vegas. He was 36 years old. To me, Dave was more than a constituent. He was more than a public servant. He was one of my medics and a teammate. You see, prior to coming to Congress, I was a member of the LVMPD search and rescue team and the department's medical director. A 13-year veteran of the department and one of only 7 commissioned search and rescue officers on this elite force, Officer Van Buskirk was called into action on the night of the 22nd to rescue a hiker who was stranded on a rocky ledge above Mary Jane Falls on Mount Charleston. Once he reached the stranded hiker via helicopter, Officer Van Buskirk secured the man and himself with harnesses to be lifted back into the helicopter. It was at some point during the lift that Officer Van Buskirk became detached from the harness and fell to the ground below. The hiker survived. He was saved by the heroic actions of Officer Van Buskirk. David's career with the department was marked by many accomplishments, but the notable achievements he would want us to remember cannot be hung on a wall or pinned on a uniform. These achievements can be summed up this way. David Van Buskirk answered the call when people needed him. This is a man who, when the call came out to rescue a hiker stranded high on Mount Charleston, did not think of himself or the danger he would be putting himself in. Like so many times before, he climbed into the helicopter and thought only of the person to be rescued, of the life to be saved. Of course, answering calls like this are what David and the rest of the Las Vegas Search and Rescue Team do. The work our law enforcement and search and rescue officers do around the valley and around our nation to keep our community safe is dangerous work. And this tragedy is a somber reminder that they put their lives on the line every time they are on duty, every time they answer that call. Dave's personal courage and selfless dedication to his work and the community he served epitomize the very core of those in the public safety professions, those that run towards the sound of gunfire or run into a burning building while everybody else is running away. I remember when Dave first joined the unit, he was ambitious, motivated, professional, and he was always smiling. And he was smart, one of the brightest with whom I've ever had the opportunity to serve. He was always looking to learn more about search and rescue techniques or about emergency medical care. We spent long hours together on SWAT missions, sitting in the cab of our rescue vehicle or on the rock during training exercises, and he was always asking questions. He was the proverbial sponge for knowledge. It was always, hey doc, what if this or that, or hey doc, what if? He always put others first, and nowhere is that more evident than in how he spent his final hours, in the dark of night with the search and rescue team, finding someone who needed help. Madam Speaker, I think we use the word hero so often to describe athletes or celebrities or public figures, we sometimes forget what a real hero looks like. One only needs to look to my left. David Van Buskirk was a hero. And that was evident by those who eulogized him this past Monday and the outpouring of public support, the thousands who lined the funeral procession route and attended his services. He touched many hearts in his short time on this earth, and stories about how he helped so many brought tears to the eyes of everyone who filled the church, even the toughest cops in attendance. While the Las Vegas search and rescue community, the Metro Police family, his friends, family members, wife, and all who knew him mourn his loss, we also celebrate Officer David Van Buskirk's 13-year career answering the call to serve the residents of Clark County. He is survived by his wife of 11 years, Adriana, his mother, Pat, his sister, Jennifer, and her two sons, Reed and Griffin. I extend my most heartfelt condolences to Adriana and the Van Buskirk family, and I pray they will be strengthened by friends and family during this difficult time. Police Officer David Van Buskirk, P number 6482, secure, final.
Gentleman yields back. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until noon today.
The House returns today at noon Eastern with a number of bills on the agenda dealing with federal agency operations and spending, also a bill placing further sanctions on Iran. This afternoon, the House will also take up a bill addressing the doubling of student loan interest rates that was passed by the Senate last week on a vote of 81 to 18. Later, the House will resume its consideration of a 2014 spending measure for the Departments of Transportation and Housing and Urban Development. The first round of votes scheduled for about 4:30 Eastern today. We'll have the House live for you when they return at noon Eastern here on C-SPAN.